This is a Film Stories original podcast. Welcome back everyone to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. We're back for our third and final bit of coverage on My Struggle 4 before we get the mailbag. I'm Tony Black and joined again by Darren Mooney to talk about Chris Carter and season 11 as a whole. So yeah, and I think it's a nice place to start actually, would be talking about Chris Carter. A quote from David Duchovny actually after the My Struggle 4 came out, and there was an interview that went live. This is what he's asked the question. Aside from yourself, who would you peg as the MVP X-Files writer? And he says something quite nice, I think, about Chris Carter. That's a starting point. So he says, well, Chris really. Chris gets so much shit from fans, it seems, but I think they forget that without Chris, there's none of this. And Chris really set the frame of the show. And not only that, he had the strength of ego, the strength of his own abilities as a writer, producer, director, to allow other writers to kind of hijack the show occasionally. And when you think about it, there's no show like The X-Files, where the showrunner has allowed all different types of tones. You can call them television auteurs, writer-directors, come on and do their thing. Vince Gilligan, Howard Gordon, Alex Ganzer, Glenn Morgan, Jim Wong, Darren Morgan. He allows all these different voices to come in and hijack his show for a week. I can't believe that the fans don't recognise what a great showrunner he is in that sense, because all other shows that you look at have a sameness of tone from week to week. This show never has. And doesn't. And that's a testament to Chris and to Chris alone, not to anyone else. It's like if a president is as good as the people he surrounds himself with, just look at the Trump presidency. It's the same with a showrunner. Now, I think that's a nice sentiment. And I know you've written a lot about this in the past, about how Chris Carter fostered this group of, the next generation of these great showrunners. And I think, My Struggle, the struggles have very much been a Chris Carter, creation. But I think he is one of the great showrunners in terms of what he created, and season 11 did reflect that. We were just talking off recording about how each episode has its own stamp because of who writes it and who directs it. So, would you agree with that assessment from Duchovny there?
I absolutely would. But this is one of the things with, and we've had a kind of a jocular tone talking about My Struggle 4, and we picked apart and we sort of commented on the parts of it that we think work, the parts of it that don't work, and the parts of it that are gonzo. And I will admit to enjoying it a great deal. But one of the things that makes me uncomfortable in some ways about certain aspects of X-Files fandom, and it happened a lot last year around the time that it was Babylon and then My Struggle 2, was you had this really weird sense, and it's happened again this year to a lesser extent, where people are arguing that the best thing that could happen for the X-Files would be to take it away from Chris Carter, which is a sentiment that I vehemently disagree with for several reasons. And as somebody who has criticized Carter's writing and who has taken issue with some of the decisions that he's made, My argument is very similar to Duchovny's, which is the X-Files is Carter's baby. The X-Files is something that he has curated, he has maintained, and he has loved. There is no X-Files without Carter. It belongs to him in a tangible and meaningful way. In the same way that I would argue, that the Watchmen characters belong to Alan Moore. And, not from a legal point of view because of contracts or anything like that, but just from an abstract moral point of view, where he created this thing and it feels right that he should get to curate it and he should get to be in charge of it. And even Duchovny's right there when he talks about the auteur stamp. Because when we talk about television auteurs, we talk about them today say David Chase on The Sopranos, or David Simon on The Wire, or Vince Gilligan even on Breaking Bad, and he talks about the sameness of tone. We talk about auteurs as people who oversee an entire series. What the X-Files has, which is remarkable, and it speaks to Carter's not only his ability to nurture talent and encourage talent, because Gilligan has compared working on the X-Files to going to writers, studying writing except being paid to do it, studying film school and being paid to do it, and being encouraged to direct episodes and to cast episodes and to develop episodes from the ground up, to take a sense of ownership of your script beyond writing, fade in and fade out. Carter did that in a way that, is not only speaks well to the writers that he curated and mentored and took care of, and who went on to change the television landscape, it speaks well to his own trust and confidence and his willingness to share the X-Files, because there is a different sense of the X-Files. You could see that even here, for example, with the nurturing of new voices in the second half of season 11, which is something the X-Files has always, and even Millennium, for example, did this very well with young writers like Chip Johansson, for example, and obviously Maher and Rendell as well. Like, you have this sort of like curation of talent and this encouragement of talent and this sort of like encouraging people to find their own voices and to write about what's really important to them. And like, the show is different. Like, the Duchovny episodes of The X-Files are markedly different from the episodes written by Vince Gilligan. And those are markedly different from the episodes written by Darren Morgan. And those are radically different from those written by Howard Gordon. And you could almost like take out the episodes by writer and construct a box set, and you would have like a functioning mini-series. You could watch all the Darren Morgan episodes, and they would feel like their own weird, like, HBO surrealist abstract comedy. You could take out all the Glenn Morgan and Jim Wong episodes, and they'd feel like an existential horror movie. You could take out all the Howard Gordon episodes, and they'd feel very much like a forerunner to 24, like thrillers with a pulsing conspiracy undertone simmering through them. You could take out the Vince Gilligan episodes, and they'd feel like studies of like human nature as it exists in a weird and complicated world. Like, and all of that is down to Carter. And like, I really feel uncomfortable when I see people denigrating like Carter as a showrunner. And like, I mean, whatever about Carter as a writer, whatever about the decisions that he's made, and we'll pick them apart. We have picked them apart, and we're going to pick them apart later on. The fact is that he curated something and continues to curate something that is magical. Like, I mean, I don't think Carter's scripts for either of the revival seasons are the best scripts there, but I do think that he deserves a great deal of credit for the existence of Mulder and Scully Meet the Were-Monster, or, you know, The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat, or Followers, because I'm not going to pronounce the actual title as it's spelt out. Like, he deserves a great deal of credit for that, and he doesn't really get it, and I feel that's unfair, and I feel that's dismissive, and I feel like letting Carter come in and do what he wants to do on the My Struggle episodes, and this sounds very condescending, it's like, let him do what he wants to do, but I feel like that leads to interesting results, and I feel like he's earned it, and I feel like he's, you know, watching them is... And we talked about this when we talked about My Struggle 4, like when we talked about the characters, when you say the plot of the episode out loud, it sounds gonzo, but it's exciting and visceral and weird in a way that contemporary television rarely is. And I feel like that's not a bad thing. As much as I would change many of the storytelling decisions, as much as I think some of the choices are awful, I feel like there's a lot to be said for Carter's willingness to trust other people with his creation, effectively, to give his baby up. And like, there's a sense that in the 5th season when he's doing like the postmodern Prometheus, where he's talking about this thing that's created that's become like a monster or a mutant that is entirely different from how he conceived it, but which serves to give this community joy and hope. And I think that it's fair within the context of the X-Files to look at that and say Carter deserves credit for this. And like, I would feel very uncomfortable saying that Carter, bringing back the X-Files without Carter would feel like carving its soul out. It would feel wrong to me. It would feel unfair. It would feel like a betrayal of like all the great work that Carter's done and continues to do, despite, again, all the shortcomings that we may point out in his scripting or his direction.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Absolutely, 100%. And, you know, I think, you know, he's definitely not somebody who, you know, he's above criticism. He never has been, you know, and there's a strong argument that in the old days, his scripts weren't always the best then. You know, it's always been that case. But his ideas and his vision and the fact he is genuinely brilliant at looking at what is coming over the next hill in terms of anxiety and, you know, where we are as a society. He's one of the best people at that in terms of theme, in terms of tapping into all this kind of stuff. And there was a good observation made on the Basement Group from, I think it was Bethany Good, who said that, you know, all of the struggles, the fact that they're struggles individual to each character, they're stylistically reflective of each of those characters. You know, when you look at My Struggle 1, it's quite paranoid and full of, you know, deep state kind of, you know, and befitting Mulder and all the kind of rabbit holes he goes down.
It's every conspiracy ever. It's almost like Millennium in a sense, in that it's like everything that you ever believed is true or could possibly have been true is true, even the stuff that contradicts the others.
Yeah, it's all rolled into one. My Struggle 2 is then, you know, from the point of view of Scully's scientific rigour, you know, and this vision she has of the future, of the possible future, but it's all about the science.
As a plague. You know? And it's all about it's disease and illness as a doctor as well. So that's a very good point, actually, from Bethany. That's a great point.
It's a great point. And then, obviously, My Struggle 3 is the false narrative perspective of the smoking man and lies and the idea that we can't trust anything that we're told, you know, and that it all might be one big giant lie. You know, that whole tagline is I want to lie, you know, as opposed to I want to believe. And then, of course, My Struggle 4 is this, tormented violence and breakneck pace of going on with William, as this teenager who's troubled. And I think that is something that now we've seen the whole tapestry. It's a brilliant observation to make, because it kind of puts it all into a level of perspective with what Carter was doing with these 4 episodes. And that's the kind of thing that people miss on first blush, because the thing that I think people have, I think one of the big problems is, and I've written about this recently, for a long time people haven't been able to divorce the X-Files and the concept from the characters. And there is such an emotional involvement with these people, and admittedly for a lot of fans it kind of blends between character and actor. Especially for Gillian
Anderson. I'm sympathetic to that. I'm sympathetic to that. Like I do feel an attachment to Mulder and Scully. The issue is that I feel a very different attachment to, say, Mulder as written by Glenn Morgan and Jim Wong as compared to Mulder written by Chris Carter.
Well, yeah, and I'm not denigrating these people for one moment. I think it's very valid, and I think it's a perfectly valid side of the fandom. But there is that level of, with a lot of fans, this real sense of attachment to the point that if anything terrible happens to them, or anything that really sort of throws them into this moment of despair, there is a real reaction, especially against Chris Carter, that how dare you do this to Scully? How dare you? And it's that kind of thing. Yes, all the choices may not be perfect, and some of them have definitely been insensitive, as I've said. But I think he's doing it for a specific purpose. He's doing it to either comment on something in society. He's doing it in order to reflect the kind of things the show has been talking about. And we've talked about this in other podcasts, and you've written about it a lot. All the things that, going back all the way through in terms of Scully's reproduction and body horror and all these kind of things that he's been interested in for years and years and years and years. There's a consistency with the struggles and with his writing in season 10 that I think people don't necessarily realise is there. And there's a lot of people who get fixated with the details. A lot of people who get fixated with the fact he hasn't connected the mythology up in the way it was in the old days. Why isn't the black oil here? Why isn't that explanation from season 7, episode 5 in there? Well, it's like, well, maybe that's not as important as we think it is. Maybe it's the whole purpose of a show like The X-Files is to reflect where we are. And I think if it hadn't done that back in the day, it would never. One of the reasons it was so successful is because it did that back in the day. And I'll give him credit more than anything else for bringing this show into the 21st century in that way. And I think that's what he does with the struggles.
Well, actually, yeah. There's a lot of stuff with the struggles. Maybe I'll go back and rewatch My Struggle 3 and I'll love it. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's one of the worst X-Files episodes ever made. But I do think you're right when you say you got to give him credit for bringing it into the 21st century. Because a lot of the stuff that doesn't work, and this is not a justification or an entire wholehearted defense of it. I think the fact it doesn't work is a legitimate and serious problem with it. And I feel like the criticisms of, say, the revelation about the cigarette smoking man's abuse of Scully, they are fair and valid, in part because they fit with the marginalization of Scully and the fact that Scully doesn't really get to process that as a character. She, even in this episode, she doesn't get a chance to respond to that. That's kept off camera. Those are all valid criticisms. And I think you're right, though, when you say that what Carter does is he updates the mythology for the 21st century. And again, stressing that this is a conceptual thing and the execution maybe isn't as smooth as it could be. One of the things that I actually adore about the struggles is the fact that they are very consciously written in the context of the 21st century, where we live in a world where conspiracy theory is no longer something that exists at the fringe margins of society and is something that's engaged with and sort of something to be poked and prodded and treated as a curiosity or as an object of interest or as a way of exploring history from a critical perspective. We've reached a point historically where conspiracy theory is basically news for a large portion of the population, where you have people who it's no longer a curiosity to speculate about black helicopters, where they actually believe that the last president of the United States was a terrorist who was sent to infiltrate, who was born in Kenya, and who, for reasons that are entirely obvious, it's a secret Muslim, and that is bad because reasons that are really disturbing and reveal a lot that's uncomfortable about modern society. But there's an element of Carter writing the X-Files in the 21st century and having to deal with the fact that a lot of the conspiracy stuff that played very well in the 90s is now accepted as truth by a worryingly large percentage of the population. And so I like decisions, like say in My Struggle 1, to go, well, the aliens, weren't really, they aren't really a big deal. They're not really that interested in what we're doing anymore. They're not really the menace anymore. Or even in My Struggle 3, which has the delightfully gonzo and again, like, I admire the sheer gumption of going for it. The gonzo revelation that the conspiracy is building a Dyson sphere in space. Which is one of those moments where you stop to think about it and you go,
what?
Well, yeah, just because it's just tossed off so casually. But I like the idea that, like, it's humans colonizing space. It's reversing the structure of the original conspiracy, which was aliens colonizing Earth. So now you have mankind colonizing space. And the cigarette-smoking man's wonderful monologue in My Struggle 2, where he's like, well, actually, turns out all the evils in the world can't be blamed on aliens, which is a very good point to make in 2016, where you have, like, world leaders who are saying all of your problems can be blamed on aliens. To have the cigarette-smoking man say, actually, it's us. We messed it up. We screwed it up so horribly that the only way for us to fix it is to screw over you guys. And I admire that the show took that turn. And there's an element of that with the revelation. I think I talked about this with Carl, where the revelation of, like, the father, William's father, William's origin, where it's like, you take the metaphor that was played out with Scully of this abuse and this right to control her reproductive organs, which was treated through alien abduction, and so sort of like obscured through this abstract metaphor, that sort of concealed the idea of women, like, having control over their own bodies and ceding that to powerful white men with special interests. And you make it literal by having one of those powerful white men effectively sexually assault her, medically rape her, as Mulder would have described it in Emily. And I feel like one of the more tone-deaf moments in Carter's interview is where, like, there was an interview after My Struggle 3 where he refused to describe it as a sexual assault, where he was like, it was through technology or through science. And that felt like a very tone-deaf moment, because what I thought he was doing was suggesting, literalizing, like, the horrors at the heart of the X-Files and stripping away the sort of comforting metaphors and making them really uncomfortable and visceral and tangible. And I feel like I admire that the My Struggles do that they make these, like, abstract sort of mythology stuff, which, was fun in the 90s, but now conspiracy theories make me a little uncomfortable, because I watch them and I wonder how many people actually believe this and let this influence their political vote about stuff like, Duchovny mentioned Trump, so I'm not drawing politics into this for the first time. But yeah, like, so I feel like disentangling the mythology from that was a good idea from my perspective, and I forgive a lot of the stuff. Like, I'm not really that bothered by the fact that it doesn't fit with what came before, because I'm like, the show has rewritten its mythology several times. What exactly does the black oil do? Well, it depends on the episode you're watching at that moment in time, how the black oil behaves, what its purpose is, and what its end goal or objective is. Does it want to get back to the stars? Does it make you catatonic? Does it grow a giant alien baby inside you? Who knows?
Yeah, and ultimately, yeah, it is only important relative to the story. Absolutely, like in season 8, that's a good example of when it came back in Vietnam, and it was this, massive load of oil under the oil rig and that kind of thing. So, and then it was completely different to what it's done before. So the mythology can vary, and I think it's the whole idea of you mentioned it in terms of the political side. The political aspects have been far more acute in season 11 than they were in season 10, because season 10 was just before the Trumpocalypse. It was just before all this happened. So it was sort of on the verge of this big sort of change that we felt over the last 2 years. But in this, and especially in The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat, which was Darren Morgan's episode, that is very acutely a criticism of Trump. But it's also, the whole idea is based on these alternate realities and this fake news agenda. And then when Mulder meets that, Dr. They, and he says, well, there's the alien, but he also meets Dr. They, who says, well, there is no truth because it doesn't matter, because it's all, everything's all out there. There's nothing to hide anymore, because everything's so crazy that there is nothing matters. Yeah. Nothing matters anymore. And that's exactly what it's all kind of been about, really. And that's sort of been one of the underlying ideas of this season, especially, and what Carter's been redoing, is this idea that in the old days there was a truth, there was a secret, there was a hidden, idea that Mulder could strive for, but now there isn't any. I mean, that's what a lot of people feel, that there's no truth, because it goes back to what the well-manicured man said way back when he said, we predict the future, and the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And that they make their own truth. And that's exactly what's happening now. But it's no longer a fringe, like you said, it's no longer a fringe conspiracy theory. It's the papers. It's the newspapers. It's the news channels. It's
national
it's the president.
Discourse. It's the president on his Twitter account going on about stuff that never happened.
Exactly.
Sean Spicer being dragged out on his first day as like press secretary to argue that the pictures that you've seen of the inauguration, which have been spread around the world, are wrong and do not convey objective truth. And you're like, this is the leader of the free world. Like,
yeah, exactly. And I think had Carter not done this and not sort of, if not directly, then at least alluded to these things in this revival, then it would have, it would have maybe tied into the past more, but it wouldn't necessarily have reflected the present. And I think I would rather have an X-Files that is, at times a bit wonky and a little bit, awkward, but at least thematically is trying to be relevant. And that is one thing that a lot of people have said about season 11, in that it feels relevant. It feels like it's about now. Even in the episodes like Followers and this, which have this very Black Mirror-esque kind of reflection of technology. They've made a real conscious effort in a lot of these episodes to connect it to the world we live in now.
It's not even those. It's even like standalones, like, say, Familiar, which feels like it could be a season 2 episode, but it's very clearly modelled on, like, Creepypasta, like Candle Cove. Ghoulie, it draws upon, like, the Slender Man mythos, opening with two girls killing each other, which is a very pointed reference to, obviously, the infamous case that's going on about the Slender Man at the moment. Like, it is very modern, it's very relevant. I think the writers, I think Carter, I think Morgan, I think Wong, well, the Morgans, if we're being honest, I think everybody deserves a great deal of credit for finding ways to make the show feel relevant while retaining its identity. Like, that's when I binge watched season 11, that's what struck me, is that it felt at once like it was classic X-Files. It's like, let's, the scene in +1 where Mulder's like, let's hit the road and get back to our bread and butter. And at the same time, it reflects the fact that the world is completely different now, and that the X-Files exist in different contexts. I mean, we were talking earlier about the stuff like different versions of the show written by different authors, and how that like speaks to Carter's power as a showrunner and his confidence and his trust in his writers. One of the things I really liked about the season 11 and the last 3 episodes is that if you look at, say, Familiar, Nothing Lasts Forever, and even My Struggle 4, they each in their own way like present an ending of the X-Files that feels relevant in a different way. Like, so obviously this works as kind of an ending for Mulder and Scully. If this doesn't work for you, you can go back and have the conversation, the pew, and Nothing Lasts Forever. But in Familiar, there's a really great line, a really great moment at the very end when Mulder and Scully leave town. It's like they're leaving town at the end of a second season episode like Red Museum or Our Town or the Calazari or whatever. And, Scully says, I can't wait to get out of this town. And Mulder's like, we're never getting out of this town. And that for me in some ways feels like the classic way to end the X-Files, because that's the moment where you realize that like the small town as it existed in the 90s version of the show is the world today. Like, it's just, you will never escape the small town because it's everywhere. And it's a way of making the show at once, like, it is, the season 11 is undoubtedly the X-Files. It's not Fringe, it's not 24, it's not Lost, it is the X-Files. But it's also the X-Files in 2018, which is remarkable. Yeah,
and it's something that I think could easily have not happened. I think it could have been very easy to just make the show exactly as it was before. With some caveats. I mean, I think a few people have commented how Gillian Anderson hasn't necessarily felt completely on point as Scully throughout these 2 seasons, and I think Duchovny's fallen back into the role in a more comfortable way than Anderson has, I think, really, when you look at it. But I think it's done a good job of sort of reflecting their passage of time as well as the writers, as well as the ideas in the show. This is a middle-aged Mulder and Scully who have changed, and I think that's been something that both seasons have done very well, especially season 11 as well. It's managed to bring those guys into 2018 too.
Yeah, I mean, you even have, like, wonderful, like, even the standalone cases have, like, small beats where Mulder and Scully acknowledge that they're aging. Like, Mulder putting on his glasses in Nothing Lasts Forever, or, the conversation in the bed in +1, for example. Like, you have this sort of, like, this acknowledgement that even in the midst of what are fairly standard cases of the week, that Mulder and Scully are, necessarily 20 years further down the road for them. And, like, I don't mind Anderson being completely different. and she's talked about difficulty finding Scully's voice, which often feels like a literal observation because her mannerisms are very familiar. I think her mannerisms are a logical extension of Scully in season 8 and season 9. It's her voice is the issue, and I don't know if it's an accent thing or if it's something like that, but it does feel like the past 20 years have taken a toll on Scully, which feels natural and organic. It feels, and this is the thing, like Anderson has always been the actor who sells like what she's given. I mean, even we talked about this when we did season 9, where even in season 9, the writers were like, what do we do with Scully? I don't know. My baby, Control C, Control V. And Anderson, on the other hand, every time she does a, my baby scene, you feel like the world is ending. You feel the vigor and the urge and the passion, and you feel the yearning to protect her child, and you feel the emotional investment there. Even when she's clearly aware that the show is more interested in Mulder or William than it is in her character. And I feel like that works here, even in like season 10, season 11 with the William arc, which turns out to be a massive dead end. Anderson sells the hell out of it, even in stuff like Founder's Mutation. Even, in stuff like Ghoulie. Like, it is all Anderson. Anderson is phenomenal, and I mean, she is different than she was in the original show, but I feel like that's apt. And I also feel it's entirely apt that Mulder is not so different, because I feel like Mulder is a character who's never really grown up in some ways. And I feel like it's great that, like, Duchovny, in particular with the Darren Morgan episodes. Duchovny is just on fire with. They're some of the best performances Duchovny's given. I think a large part of that's down to the fact that it feels more natural for Mulder to have never quite grown up. Even when he was older than Scully, he always seemed, sort of like a teenager in some respects.
Yeah. I think that's true, and I think they've approached the roles, I think, in different ways. So it's very interesting. I think how the revival seasons have developed, and I suppose the best way to close off this conversation really is to ask, what would you say your favourite season 11 episode is? Now you've watched all of them in fairly quick succession. Which one would stand out to you as, not necessarily, you could pick a best if you think a critically best. Equally, you could pick a favourite, but what leaps out at you when I ask you that?
Two, and they're two very different extremes, and I think people know what those choices are going to be. The first one is the Lost Art of Forehead Sweat, which is just perfect, and I feel like it's really weird when Duchovny, and I mentioned this when I talked about Carl, where Duchovny's talked about how the X-Files having multiple endings, and how because of the nature of the show, the X-Files will eventually end, although I feel like that's a lot less certain in 2018 than it was in like 1998 when he said this. But he says eventually the show will end, and it'll have a final image, but for the people who watch it, there'll always be one image that they'll imagine to be the perfect final episode of the show. And I'm being honest, I have several of them. I think that the end of season 8, where the camera pulls out and leaves Mulder and Scully with William, is a great ending to the show. I think that Mulder and Scully having beers at the end of Jesuette is an excellent ending to the show. But I also think that, for me, The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat would be a really great last episode of The X-Files, because it just feels like such a wonderful celebration of the show and its fandom, and in particular, like, the difficulty and the gap that exists between our memory of what The X-Files was and what it is. Because, I mean, it's obviously, you point out, it's very relevant in the age of Trump. I mean, there's jokes about aliens building walls around Earth to keep us out. But it's also a very earnest and a very honest, sort of sincere look at what it is to be a fan of pop culture, to be a fan of the X-Files, and to bring it back and to have to deal with the fact that how it is now is not necessarily how you remember it being, and sort of having to reconcile the two. And it's very clever, and all Darren Morgan scripts are incredibly clever, but this one actually really touched me in a way that I think Weremonster did as well. I think Jose Chung's Doomsday Defense on Millennium also touched me in that way. I think obviously Clyde Bruckman's Final Repos did as well, and even, so there's a real emotional power there for me. And then also the other side, the flip side, would be Followers, which is just, it's like, If The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat is like, I would happily leave the show here, this would be the great last X-Files episode. Followers is like, actually, I feel like I could watch another couple of years of this. Followers like, this thing still has life in it. It still has energy. It still can do things that very few other television shows can do, particularly ones that are airing on network television, which is a mostly silent episode about killer technology that's like narrated through apps. It's just a wonderful piece of television. It's clever, it's energetic, it's fun. It's got everything in there, from the wonderful touch of like Scully throwing out her vibrator to Mulder tipping the bare minimum amount to call the like evil robots off their back. It's just so fun, and it's so clever, and it's so relevant, and it's so modern, and it's just it's smart without seeming bookish. It's playful while still being sincere. It's a wonderful piece of work for everybody involved. So like, yeah, those are my 2 picks. It would be like, you know, if I have to leave, if this is the last season, Lost Art of Forehead Sweat. If you're going to tell me there's going to be a season 12, then Followers. It's like, yeah, I'm good with this.
Yeah, we are of one mind, I think, because those are exactly my 2 as well, and for very similar reasons. I think also, I'm very tempted to sort of put as a second joint number 2 Familiar, because I think Familiar was a great throwback to the original series, and I think I loved a lot about that. I think, you know, and Ben Van Allen did a great job writing that script as well. So I think. But Followers edges it for me as number 2. But yeah, Lost Art of Forehead Sweat is my favourite. So yeah, it's interesting. And what's been great is, you know, we on the Basement group on Facebook, we put out a list of where everyone lists their top 10, you know, their 10 in order, and they're very different. You know, the lists are completely, you know, there's not
great.
Even. Yeah, it is good, because some people will put the Lost Art of Forehead Sweat towards the bottom. You know, some people are putting things like, you know, Nothing Lasts Forever high up, or, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting that everyone's got a different take on what they really took from this season. But I think, you know, the general consensus is that it was a good year. It was an improvement over season 10, probably the best season since season 8. And, you know, I think if this is it, I think on the whole, despite a couple of things and a bit of a wonky ending, it's been a good final season.
I feel like it probably could have done better by Gillian Anderson, but that's primarily a My Struggle 4 concern rather than anything else. Like, I feel, and particularly because, you know, you have Carter speculating about whether or not he'd bring it back without Anderson, and you're like, no. Carter speculating about bringing the X-Files back without Anderson reminds me of what we talked about yesterday when we talked about the pregnancy, where it's like, look, you tried doing this before and you ended up with a horrible mess when you tried to do the show without Duchovny. And it made such a horrible mess that you've spent a lot of time picking up the pieces since, and you've finally got them all sorted out. And what are you going to do? You're talking about bringing it back without Anderson. And it's like, you just killed one of the characters you brought in to replace the 2 leads. Like, you made your feelings clear on this. Like, or at least I think you've made your feelings clear on this.
I don't think it would work without Scully. I think it worked without Mulder, weirdly enough, for a lot of it, but which is strange because you'd think it wouldn't, but it can work without Mulder. I don't think it could work without Scully. Now, I think it would struggle really. So I think they'd have to have neither of them or both of them at this point. So, and then if you've got neither of them, then you might as well call it something else, really. So it's an interesting path that he may take if he chooses, or he gets the chance to do more. And we will obviously, hopefully, still be going as a podcast. But hopefully it won't take 15 more years.
I hope it's like a Daniel Craig negotiating ploy. I hope it's like Anderson, because it's weird to say this, because going into season 11, I was like, I can take or leave this. And I mean, even now, I'm like, if this is the final season, well, I'm okay with that. But I'm also like, well, if there's more, I would really be happy and excited to see that. But part of me is kind of hoping that it's Anderson's doing her whole, a much more polite version of the Daniel Craig. I'd rather smash this glass right here and slit my wrist than do another James Bond film. Like, well, there's a dumpster truck full of money outside your house, Mr. Craig. It's like, where do I sign?
Yeah. I think the big sticking point for her has been the basically uprooting for 6 months to Vancouver, and when she lives in England. And I think there's been, she's talked in interviews about how she wants to do other things and things like that. And I think she's a bit like Daniel Craig, oddly enough. I think she's found being attached to one character and it being her legacy more difficult than David Duchovny has, in a way. I think he's kind of grown into accepting that Mulder is what he'll be remembered for, really. Whereas I think Anderson still struggles a little with that with Scully. I think she's very proud of Scully, but I think she wants to be remembered for more. And I think, and Daniel Craig clearly wants to be remembered for more than Bond. You know, like Sean Connery wanted to be remembered for more than Bond. So sometimes these actors, whereas Roger Moore was quite happy just being Bond for the rest of his life. So some people have different responses to this kind of like one character that they'll be defined by. So it's interesting.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking, Tony? If Anderson doesn't want to uproot to Vancouver for 6 months a year, season 12 of the X-Files set entirely in Northern Ireland or England. That's your pitch.
Yeah, do you know what? Yeah, it would become The Fall then, wouldn't it, really?
Yeah.
You know, she could just have a British accent then. Scully's moved to England, you know, she's become a detective. I'd live with that. Yeah, it would be like that weird season of 24 where it was set in London.
Yeah, it was Live Another Day, and it was only 8 episodes, sorry, it's only 12 episodes long.
Yeah. That was the one where Jack Bauer kept saying pub, and it sounded really weird. Like, he's in the pub. It's like, stop saying pub, Kiefer Sutherland. It's just weird. Yeah. But anyway.
You could still call it a bar even when you are physically in England.
Exactly. Yeah. Although it would fit for Mulder, because obviously Mulder spent a fair few of his years, formative youth in Oxford. So, it's just coming home for him, really.
Oh, wow. You could do a nice, like, ninth season symmetry thing where Mulder goes to Oxford to lecture.
Oh, yeah. That'd be ace.
Well, there's a pitch right there. Midsummer Mulders. And for some reason he's wearing like a tweed jacket. I don't know why.
Well, obviously because he's in England, and he's in the middle, Oxford.
He's lecturing at Oxford.
Yeah, he's got to wear tweed, obviously. Yeah. So until we get the 12th season set in Oxford, then Darren, thanks for coming on and talking
pleasure.
about My Struggle 4 and contributing to the Xcast once more. Where can people find you then online to get more Mooney?
More Mooney in their lives. Well, you can find me online at Twitter at Darren_Mooney. You can find me, I write at the Movie Blog, where I am blogging randomly about stuff at the moment while I work on other stuff. I also co-host a podcast, which Tony has guested on and hopefully will guest on again, which is The 250, which you can find online at The 250. You can listen to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, wherever good podcasts are available. We go through the IMDb's top 250 movies of all time, one movie at a time, once a week. It's great fun. I'm very proud of that. I hope my co-host is as well. But yes, I know. You can find me online at those various places. Oh, also, I suspect everybody listening to this has already either bought it or gone to the library and read it and has been very supportive of it. But I feel my publishers would be very disappointed if I didn't mention I also have a book, Opening the X-Files, which is available now. And just to say thank you very much to everybody who has been so incredibly supportive and kind of about it. It actually really means a lot to me, so thank you very much.
Reckon any chance we might get an updated version with the new Revival series?
That is not in my hands. I suspect I may talk to my I'm talking to my publishers about something else at the moment, so it may or may not come up, but that's outside of my control, I'm afraid.
Well, let them know. I think there'd be a big fan base here for that, really. I think people would love that little revised edition of the book. But either way, guys, buy the book that's out now, okay, because it's great if you haven't already. But yeah, that's fantastic. Follow Darren for all that goodness, and follow us on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook with our page, and the Basement group, the Xcast Basement, which you can find, and obviously on Patreon if you want to support us. That'd be brilliant to help us develop the show and make more of it. Patreon /the Xcast. So we're not quite done with My Struggle 4 yet. We've got the mailbag. I suspect it's going to be like a 5-hour bonanza. Poor Carl, right? He's got a lot to wade through, I think. And
that's Carl's struggle.
Yeah.
The mailbag episode should open with a monologue from Carl in which he relates his life story to this point.
Yeah, my name is Carl Gerhard Busch. But yeah, he's got a great guest lined up, I think, for the My Struggle 4 mailbag. So don't miss that. And then we've still got some interviews to come with people involved in season 11 as well, which we haven't been able to.
I'm very excited about these. I've heard rumblings and rumors about these, so I'm very, very excited about these. There's some very good catches.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, some interesting behind the scenes folk that we're going to be talking to. So that's still to come. That's still to come over as we go into April. So our season 11 coverage isn't done yet. We've got a few more bits and bobs, and then we'll update you on what's next for the Xcast. Because just because the X-Files is over for now doesn't mean we are. So we're not going anywhere. But look out for the mailbag soon. I'll be back in the near future, and thanks as ever for listening and supporting, guys. A big thank you to everyone who's listened and downloaded to these episodes over the last 10 weeks as we followed season 11. This community is awesome, and I'm so proud of it. So thank you, and big thank you to everyone who's
thank you,
contributed.
Tony.
Well, thanks. That's really lovely. Thank you, Darren. Big thank you to Carl as well for stepping in and recording a lot of these and doing a lot of the editing as well as me. So it's it's been great. So yeah, we'll be back soon. Until then, trust no one.